Welcome. My name is Don Sull. I'm a professor at London Business School. And in today's podcast, we're going to talk about why good promises go bad. Now, in the last installment of our podcast series, we talked about execution, how to get things done, and in particular focused on three distinct logics of execution: getting things done with power, with processes, and with promises. It turns out promise-based execution is particularly well suited to getting things done when you know roughly what you like, but you don't know quite how to do it. And you want to leave that to the people who are closest to the facts on the ground to use their judgment and their creativity to come up with good solutions when executing. So promises really matter in getting things done. There's one problem, however, with promise-based management. In most companies, in most industries, in most countries, most of the time, people make bad promises. Well-intentioned perhaps, but bad promises. What does bad mean? Bad in this context means that other people, the people they're promising to, don't feel that they can rely on those promises. When you can't rely on a promise, it turns out there are a lot of costs associated with that, a lot of friction in the organization. You duplicate effort, you try to do it yourself, deadlines are missed, opportunities are passed by, frustration mounts, distrust mounts. There are a lot of costs in organizations to bad promises. And our research has shown that less than half of all promises made in large, complex organizations do people believe they can rely on. So the question on the table is this: why do good promises, well-intentioned promises, go bad, and what can you do about it? Well, the first way good promises go bad is when folks take a legalistic perspective to promises. They focus on the letter of the law, the terms of the contract. It turns out the most effective promises emerge out of good, strong, robust dialogue. It's less about the promise as a thing and more about the promise to promise as a process. Now, these dialogues typically go through three stages. First of all, the customer and the provider come to a meeting of minds, what's to be done and why. Then the provider goes off and makes it happen. And finally, important not to forget, the customer closes the loop by acknowledging that they're satisfied. Another way good promises go bad is what I call the smoke-filled room trap. Imagine some politicians puffing on their cigars, making a deal in private. Now, the problem with private deals is they're very easy to wriggle out of because you haven't staked your public reputation for trustworthiness on delivering them. So the most effective promises are public. Another way good promises go bad is what I call drive-by promises. So picture a paper boy on his bicycle delivering papers in the morning, just driving by and throwing the papers at houses, and a little later the homeowner's stumbling out in their pajamas and picking the papers up. A similar thing happens in organizations quite a bit, where people barge into your office, they make a request, they don't explain exactly what they want, why they want it, and you may not probe as to what they, really get clarity on what they want, just to say, yeah, I'll do that. Okay? In contrast to these passive promises, the most effective promises are active. Both parties take responsibility, mutual responsibility, for understanding what the other one wants, what they need, and coming to a good, full, rich understanding of the promise. A third problem, another way that good promises go bad is what I call an offer you can't refuse problem. So this comes from a scene in The Godfather where Vito Corleone makes a potential business partner an offer he can't refuse. Now, managers are often tempted to do something like this, to just kind of say, do it, issue orders. The problem with these kinds of promises induced under duress, coerced, is that just like a contract written with a gun to your head is not binding, people don't feel coerced promise. They don't feel bound by coerced promises. They may comply out of fear, but they're unlikely to feel personal drive to make that promise happen. As a result, they may check out mentally. They may not provide all their creativity and initiative to delivering on the promise. So, an offer you can't refuse. Another way that good promises go bad is what I call the nudge-nudge-wink-wink problem. So this comes from a skit in Monty Python where you have two gentlemen sitting in a gentleman's club, and one of them is talking about some innocuous topic, the weather or something, gardening, and the other one says, "Oh, I know exactly what you mean, nudge, nudge, wink, wink," when it's absolutely clear to everyone watching, he has no idea what's going on. He's assuming implicitly he knows what the other person is on about, but he doesn't at all. Promises fail like this as well, when people, the customer or the provider, assume they know implicitly what the other person has in mind, and they're often wrong. So the most effective promises, in contrast, are explicit. Both parties take the time to articulate explicitly what it is the promise is about and why. Another way the promises go bad is when they're unmoored from corporate priorities. The best promises are linked explicitly to a company's and organization's objectives and goals, commitments, broad direction, rather than being locally optimal agreements that don't make sense in the global context of the organization. So, good promises, well-intentioned promises often go bad, but there are things you can do to avoid that. The first is to remember that it's not about the terms of the agreement, but about the process, the discussions. And you can also remember that the most effective promises have 5 characteristics. Most effective discussions have 5 characteristics. They're public, they're active, they're voluntary, they're explicit, and they're mission-based. That is to say, they're linked into overall corporate priorities. Now, if you want a little help remembering those, you can think of them by their first letters, P-A-V-E-M, PAVEM, and it's a little bit hokey, but still it can help you to remember. You can think of public, active, voluntary, explicit, and mission-based promises as paving the ground for good promises in your organization. So, today we've talked about how to make good individual promises, but there's another question. How do you make broader cultural changes so good promises are made and honored in organizations? That will be the topic of our next podcast. Stay tuned.